dedicated member of the Irish Volunteers since the early days of 1915, when he was one of 4 section commanders of Donoughmore Company. As a section commander, he was also one of 9 members of the company council who met for additional instruction. From the outset, the Donoughmore Company held weekly public parades, which were mostly within their own area, but also outside their boundaries, with the conviction that neighbouring areas would be encouraged to form their own companies, and they did so. On Easter Sunday 1916, James Barrett was with his Donoughmore Company as they mobilised in Cork that morning, with all arms, ammunition and equipment, and 2 days' rations. Although the companies in Cork were not called into action that day, they soon were, and James Barrett continued to be an active member of the company over the next 5 years. He went on to hold the ranks of quartermaster and adjutant. In early January 1921, a battalion flying column was formed in the area. The members of the column were drawn from the various companies in the battalion, including James Barrett's company of Donoughmore. Later that month, an ambush was put in place at Dripsey, but informers gave away the position of volunteers, and British forces attempted to encircle them. However, the encirclement was not complete, and under cover of a rearguard party of volunteers, the remainder of the column managed to retreat through the gap and survive. James Barrett was with the Donoughmore members at the eastern end of the ambush site, and he was wounded with the rearguard party as the column made the retreat under heavy fire. Here's the account from John Manning. Fire was opened up on our position immediately by the men on the road, and we replied. As it was now apparent that the enemy was aware of our position, the order to withdraw was given. The whole column now retired from our trench cover and moved to our rear in a northerly direction. After crossing the first fence to our rear, we were surprised by a party of military in the adjoining fields and had to change the direction of our withdrawal. We now moved west across the ploughed field, where we came under fire from the enemy. 4 of our men, Tyg McCarthy, Dennis Murphy, Patrick O'Malley and James Barrett, were wounded while crossing this field and were taken prisoners. James Barrett has suffered a severe gunshot wound to the leg in Cork Military Barracks Hospital. His leg was amputated. His health deteriorated and he developed septicemia. 5 of James's comrades who had been captured along with him at Dripsey were executed on February 28. In response, 6 British soldiers were shot in Cork City that night, and in reprisal the British troops took their frustration out on the bedbound James Barrett. I remember the oration at our Donoughmore Commemoration, which described the savage beating meted out with British rifle butts to James Barrett. The cruelty was witnessed by a survivor from Clonmount, who was sharing the hospital ward with James. James Barrett's funeral cortege from Cork City to Donoughmore was repressed by British troops. The mourners were told that 30 to 40 people could attend, and mourners' cars would be closely followed along the entire route by British military vehicles. And it's a shame that commemorations 100 years later are restricted, and efforts to pay respects are threatened and attendees intimidated. Well, that's what I have to say about James Barrett, and Egrina ar an imrór pile ó bror dílis Gaelgór agus an ógla cróga seo Seamus de Barrod ar yeiste gravana.
Thank you very much, John. Just to conclude, I suppose, James had been kind of involved in the Republican movement in his heart well before the founding of the Volunteers. He'd been a committed Gaelic leaguer. He'd been involved in organising feshes and Aontuchts and stuff. He'd been involved in the Irish language. He was involved in Hawalla GA. He captained the team. He led them to 2 mid-corp finals, which they won. And in his own activities, he was both a captain and a quartermaster. And as quartermaster, he was involved in the procurement of weapons in the whole district, in raiding houses for them, in asking locals to surrender them, in trying to buying weapons, and involved in several attacks on RIC barracks and stuff like that. He didn't involved other in kind of ambushes and stuff like prior to Dripsey, in blowing up bridges and felling trees and stuff like that. And even just kind of in the month prior to his own death, they had been trying to set up a bomb-making factory in Donoughmore, which I'm sure he would have been very central to it, and it was kind of also possibly showing his own close connection to Charlie Hurley, who died only 2 or 3 days before him. Charlie Hurley had sent one of his officers from West Cork to help set up the bomb-making factory in Donoughmore. So I suppose, like, prior to 1916, most of these men would have known each other very well. They'd have been all in the officer training classes inside in Cher Street in Cork City, and he would have built up a good relationship with people like Tomas McCurtain, Terence McSweeney, Charlie Hurley, and a host of other officers who were kind of the core of the Republican movement in Cork in the 1920s. So just to finish up, we will sing around the beat together.
Okay. Arrow. Solution Ralta. Hurry. Arrow.
In the field of fall, we are slow, our dear lonely going, they for the sair, Shantir or Sheepshire Flagstaff, we offer the dear of the throne, and over the heads of the wind, the gathered with unwashed no sail, the God is shrill, free dog of the air, shall ye connie or on the
See, Arrow.